So I've not uploaded a video in a little while because the project's kind of came to a grinding halt. I discovered that I've actually bit off more than I can chew, with in particular the art direction. I wanted to go with like a very specific art style, and after working on the model I realised how involved it was actually going to be. So I kind of ended up petering off and taking a few months off and not really working on anything. I honestly don't want to compromise on the art style after like some thought. I kind of want the art to look the way that I envision it. As a result, I was kind of going down the route of maybe I needed to start something new and choose a art style that suits that type of game that is a lot easier for me to create. So I kind of was thinking about previous projects that I've worked on in the past and stuff that I've still got art assets for. One of the projects I worked on about 3 years ago or something like that was a Zelda-like game, which I later turned into a side-scroller. Both projects I ended up stopping because of how complicated I made the level design. For example, in the original Zelda-like, you could actually turn the camera 360 degrees, but that meant when you're exploring the dungeons, I needed a system that would cull walls where the player was underneath, and that became a very complicated thing to do, and it made building levels very difficult. So at the time I felt my skills weren't really good enough to be able to tackle that. I decided then to move on to trying maybe a platformer would be a lot simpler, and I realised that I got a bit too ahead of myself with crazy like level design where you could jump into the background and transition through a 3D environment but on like 2D planes, and that started to get again incredibly complex. My general problem is I have an idea that seems really cool and unique, and I don't realise when I start working on it how involved it actually becomes. This time I think I'm going to revisit the Zelda-like game, but I'm not going to do the whole 360 camera thing. I'm going to try and keep the level design very simple and have that in my mind from the very get-go, because it always seems that level design is the point where I have trouble. I'm going to basically rebuild the Zelda game from scratch. I'm not going to go back to the previous project and start working on it. The reason is because the movement system that I had for that project was something that I developed myself. It wasn't perfect, it had issues. And then when I moved on to the platformer, I used the same system and found loads and loads of issues with it, especially when it comes to like the edges of platforms and stuff like that, and basically the detection system wasn't good enough. So I ended up looking for alternatives that I could buy off the shelf from the asset store. I bought one, got in touch with the guy who developed it, kind of had some back and forth with him, and then slowly dissected his code, worked out how he did it, and then kind of from there developed my own kind of movement system, like a variant of his like system, and developed my own actor system, which kind of encompasses a lot of things, so it also works with the AI and everything. This was the system that I used in the horror prototype. So this project, I'm not going to go into mega details exactly what it is going to be. Instead, I'm just going to show you my progress as I go through. But the end goal at the moment is just to get a basic working prototype where we can transition between some very basic rooms. We can pick up items, maybe have a very basic inventory system. So we'll have a bit of movement, combat, the AI elements that I used in the horror prototype, introduce them into this project, because all the systems I created will just port over very easily into this project, which is a good thing because I've basically done the same with the movement as well. I've ported in the movement, I've made some adjustments to try and make it work with how I want it to work in this game. When I get to the AI, it'll be the same kind of kettle of fish. It'll just be a case of introducing all the scripts into the project and then just making programs that suit the enemies that are going to be in the game. Without further ado, let's get into like what the actual project is, what I've done so far. There's not a lot. I've only worked on this for a couple of days, but this is a old model that I had, which is like a chibi character in her underwear at the moment, but I have got various outfits for her. The animations aren't polished, they're quite basic at the moment, and some of them were made for a platformer, but we've got like our basic movement. The camera as well at the moment isn't set up correctly, it's just following the character. So in time that will be improved, and probably the movement is subject to change, like how it feels and that. I feel like she kind of moves a bit too slow at the moment. But we've got this, so this is our basic movement, and then if I hold shift, we've got a sprint as well. So the way I want this to work is kind of like the 3D Zelda games, like if you think of Ocarina of Time, where when you run towards a edge, you will automatically jump. If I walk normally, I'll just fall off. And I respawn because I've just put a basic thing that respawns you. But if you sprint towards a ledge, it will automatically jump over. Right, so you can see it does it here as well. But this jump is fixed. So when you can't adjust how far you jump. You would just go like, it's kind of like a realistic jump. If you jump in real life, there's very little you can do in terms of air control once you start jumping. And then the other feature I've got at the moment is we've got like a dash. So again, this is just a placeholder animation. It's like a little jump step, but I kind of want it so you kind of zoom forward and then kind of brake and kick up dust. At the moment, it doesn't look great, but it kind of does the job. So I had been working on basically this movement system, the way it does the dodge. This will work for, I'll use this to implement into other things. So say when you swing a sword and you move forward slightly, that will also be incorporated. So I've had to set up like various different things for this. So when it comes to ledges and you dodge to it, usually what would happen is you'd continue to move along the edge and like kind of like I'll just dodge straight over. But I've set up like a few parameters where we can set when it reaches an edge, so it does a whole edge detection thing while you're dodging, and when it sees an edge it goes, okay, I'll either stop dead, which will work for say if I'm swinging a sword, I want it to stop dead and not have you fall off an edge. But in the case of the dodge, I've made it so when you dodge into an edge, you do a jump. So you can kind of do this into to jump again. So if you're not sprinting, just want to quickly get over this edge. If you stood right on it, you can still jump. It does like increments, and then when it finds an edge, it will jump, right? So it's not like pixel perfect of where it stops and jumps, but it's close enough. And then as I was developing this, then I found, well, what happens when you try and go up slopes? Because the movement system works with slopes fine, right? I can set all the slope, what kind of steep slopes you have. So the issue with this was if you try and sprint up it, which you can do fine now, you can see like there's this red line that comes up underneath, which like points along the normal of the slope. So the issue I was having was when I was sprinting up a slope like this, I was jumping because the edge detection was going underneath the slope. So there's like this little red line here pointing forwards and it's flat. That's because we're walking like perpendicular to the slope. Whereas if we're walking up and down it will actually adjust. Try and get a good view of it. It will actually adjust going up and down the slope. So as you can see now, if I do the dodge up here, the check it aligns itself with the actual slope. So when we do left and right, it's actually flat, and then when we're going up or down, if we go at like this angle, it basically aligns with the slope, so it does the check correctly. So when we do it up this floor, you'll see that it changes direction. And there is no like issues going up and like transitioning from these slopes with that dodge, and when we sprint, and all this kind of works now, which is really great. So it's not a lot, but my plans with these videos are just to make small progress updates rather than doing like a big long video every time. Just go, I've done this now. This like the next kind of step for me is probably going to be introducing the weapons. So drawing the sword, putting the sword away, and then attacking with the sword. and getting like the visual effects and stuff working. I have got like enemies made up. I'll probably put a few on the screen. So I've got like slimes, mushroom monsters and stuff. Some of them are rigged up and ready to go with animations. Others are still kind of work in progress. But it's all stuff that I worked on a long time ago that I'll be able to just put into the game straight away. So hopefully within a few months, if depending on how much time I spend on this, I might actually have a working prototype. So if you follow me on Patreon, I'll have like an actual build for people to test out. Thanks for watching. If you want to follow along, and sorry that the horror prototypes kind of died a death. It's probably a project I'll come back to. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, and if not, will you kindly bugger off?